This UCSD TV program is presented by University of California Television. Like what you learn? Visit our website or follow us on Facebook and Twitter to keep up with the latest programs.
What is the difference between mere life and the good life? Aristotle once said, "The good life is a life informed by the principles that express our highest ideals, life as we would like to live it."
The good life is an education that rattles and decenters.
Relationships, sustenance, and aspiration.
A life of reflection and agency in concert with others in pursuit of collective well-being.
The good life is to equate instead with a healthier public life.
Pursuing knowledge, cultivating friendship, preserving freedom, satisfying needs.
The good life is having a language to express your deepest thoughts, emotions, and beliefs.
The good life is when students' eyes light up at the realization that their engineering work will improve other people's lives.
Stay with us as some of UC San Diego's finest scholars share their pursuit of the good life.
Welcome. Welcome to UC San Diego. Welcome to the Great Hall of International House. And welcome to this, the Making of the Modern World Lecture Series. This year's theme is the good life. Each week I say something to the effect of the purpose of this series is to bring to you some of the finest scholars, artists, and professors at this university. And each week it is true, but our speaker tonight is unusual. He is indeed an extraordinary world-renowned scholar, but that's not how he's known to you. He is indeed a professor of engineering, and yet that's not his primary identification on this campus. I could say we bring to you our finest administrators, but that doesn't sound rich enough. I could say we're bringing to you my boss, but that seems kind of personal. He is indeed our Chancellor. Steve Cassidy will be introducing him in a minute, and it is our tremendous pleasure to have Pradeep Khosla here tonight.
Thanks, Alan, and thanks again for coming again this week. A great privilege and honor to introduce to you tonight Pradeep Khosla. He is the 8th Chancellor of UCSD. I think it's about the 5th for me in my time here since 1980. He came to us from Carnegie Mellon University in August of 2012. At Carnegie Mellon, where he earned his degree and was on the faculty, he rose to the level of university professor. He works in the field of electrical and computer engineering, and as I hear from colleagues in his division, he is a world-renowned specialist on robotics. He has instituted a strategic planning process for the campus. We're all waiting to hear the details. Among his honors, member of the National Academy of Engineering, Fellow of the Indian Academy of Engineering, Honorary Fellow of the Indian Academy of Science, Fellow of the American Association of Artificial Intelligence. I could go on, but I wanted to tell a very quick story about Chancellor Khosla that is not in your notes and that to me speaks volumes to his commitment both to the university and to the community. It has to do with a trip that he made last April to Southeast San Diego, where he introduced to students of the Gompers Preparatory Academy, Lincoln High School, and UCSD's own Preuss School, that the Chancellor's Associates was initiating a scholarship program under which, if you got into UCSD, they would pay you your tuition and a $10,000 annual scholarship. He held up the blue and gold honors cord that UCSD graduates of note are known to wear, promising this in advance to the students who might be accepted into this program. But I wanted to quote to you his words to the students. He said to them, You can't ever give this scholarship back to me, but you can give it back to society when you do this for someone after you. If that's not about the university and the good life, I don't know what is. His theme tonight is Remaking the Modern Research University. Please join me in welcoming to the microphone Chancellor Pradeep Khosla.
Thank you. Thank you, Steve, and thank you, Alan. The two of you talked longer than I was planning to, but I really appreciate the kind comments. So as I was sitting there, I was wondering, what did I do to be here today? Actually, I'm really honored to be here today in front of so many of you. And I see a lot of my own staff members who typically go home at 5 p.m. or sitting. That's not true, they actually work. But they are right now in the audience trying to listen to what the Chancellor is going to say. But before I start, let me have you help me recognize a couple out here who's spending their 14th wedding anniversary listening to me. Hans and Kim, where are you? Please join me in. This is. This is commitment. I really appreciate this. So about, I don't know, 4, 5, 6 months ago, Alan came to me and said, you know, we have this series called Making of the Modern World, and this time around the topic is the good life. And you've had a good life, so you should talk about it. So, and no, seriously, so I thought about it. I said, look, this is 32 years ago when I came to this country at age 25. And looking back, I really had a good life. And then the more I thought about what is it that I could talk about that could inspire somebody or get people excited, it turns out I've had a boring good life, right? So I said then maybe I should not talk about my life. I should talk about what is it that made me lead this life. And I can tell you, it was the academic system in this country, which is why I came here. It was the university in this country, which is where I spent all of my career. I never went anywhere else. And so what I want to share with you today is my thoughts. These are not my thoughts. This is just the history of the U.S. Academy. And it is amazing. As we sit here today, and the oldest university in the country is Harvard. As we sit here today and look at this university, it is not what it was when it was created. The goals when Harvard was created were very different than what it is right now. And it tells you a lot about the culture of this country, how we as a country have evolved, how we as a society have evolved. And I thought it would be very useful exercise to just go through what's it all about. Let's see now if I can get this to work. Okay. So I want to talk about a couple of things. One is about the evolution of the American academy or the academic system in general. And talk about their evolving mission. Where we sit right now, where research, education, and service is our mission, was not the mission when this was created. And then talk a little bit about the challenges we face. And so if I can somehow convince you that we are right now on a trajectory which will take us back to why we were created and the way we were created, which, by the way, was not very good, then you would know that we need to do something about this system so that this system goes on the track that it's supposed to be on and not on the track it's on right now. So let's look at this quote from Clark Kerr, I think captures it all. Clark Kerr, who was, I think, one of the leading presidents, one of the leading intellectual leaders in American higher education and in the administration, was the president of the UC system for several years. And if you didn't know, I think he was the president for about 5 years or so. And it was he was let go in a very unceremonious way, even though I think he was one of the leading intellectuals looking back of our era. So he basically said that this university system is neither Oxford nor is it Berlin. And the reason he said that is because our university system was taken from the English system, Oxford and Cambridge, and then from the German system, because those were the two dominant systems in the 1600s when this country was created, when the Pilgrims came here. And looking back, you can see these two systems are not dominant anymore, but we are a dominant system, and we are neither Oxford nor Berlin right now. We are something very different. And we are not part of this world, we are not out of this world, but we are somehow making a very big impact. So that was Clark Kerr. So let me take you to how this system looked like. So between 1636 and 1800, there were only 25 colleges in this country. Between 1800 and 1830, so there's 160 years or so, there's only 25 colleges. Next 30 years, there's another 25 to make it about 49 colleges. And then next 30 years, it's another 100 or so colleges, 125. So it tells you how the higher education system evolved. So if you look at this time period, you're seeing also the Industrial Revolution starting. If you look at this time period, and if you are a student of higher education, as in not college-level higher education, but K through 12, for a long time in this country, higher education was going to up to 6th or 8th grade. And then high school graduates, it's only in the 1900s that you would go to a high school, right? So this is before this period. And so the country started off as focusing on higher education by building universities or building colleges, and today there are 4,500 colleges, and it's not clear to me that we have enough colleges for everybody, because the number of citizens educated with a BS is only about 30%. Only about 30% of the US population has a BS. We just assume that everybody around us is educated, which is true in this area, but if you go outside in the country, the level of education, even though this country is more educated than other countries, it's not quite educated enough to be where we need to be, where we want to be. So, this is how it goes. 1636 is when Harvard is created, and it opens with 9 students. A few years later, maybe like 60 years later, William and Mary is created. Then there was this collegiate school, which today is called Yale, College of New Jersey, which today is called Princeton, College of Philadelphia, which today is called Penn. And this was a turning point in the philosophy. Up to the creation of Penn, the whole notion of education was basically educating the elite and being very elitist. It was only the educated families who could send their kids to school. It was only the rich who could send their kids to school. And basically, the education was based around 3 areas: theology, law, and medicine. And that's it. It was when Penn was created, Ben Franklin, when he created Penn, he said, you know, this is not what society needs. What we need is practitioners. So we are now going to create a school that focuses on practical studies and focuses on science, and that was Penn's focus, on business and on public service. And back here, then there were a few other colleges created, but the next big revolution was the creation of Johns Hopkins, which was 1876, and Johns Hopkins was created based on, so up to now, all the colleges have been created based on the English model, the undergraduate college system, the small college system where theology, law, and medicine are basically the focus. When Johns Hopkins was created, it was created based on the German model, where the whole idea was that there was going to be no education, quote unquote, no teaching in this university. It was all going to be a bunch of very smart superstar faculty with their graduate students just running around and doing research and sharing great ideas and great thoughts. It was all seminars, it was all laboratories, and there were no lectures, there was no notion of an undergraduate student. So you can now see how these two systems have merged together. So it was at Johns Hopkins when Johns Hopkins was created, the focus was on medicine, and the focus was on science and engineering and on business. So there was not much focus on law. In fact, ironically, the president of Johns Hopkins today is a lawyer, and there is no law school at Johns Hopkins, right? Which is actually interesting how the presidency has evolved. Okay, so Johns Hopkins was a turning point in the history of American education, and it was the first to emphasize research and led to the new American model. So what was interesting about Johns Hopkins was that while it was the first to emphasize research, it was based on a purely German model. And the German model had a very strong sense of hierarchy. There was a hierarchy of students, and there was a hierarchy of professors. So the full professor, the associate professor, the assistant professor, the postdoc, the PhD student. And the German model, even today, if you've been to Germany, or if you know anybody who's been to the German higher education system, is a very hierarchical model. A professor's life in Germany is really good. It is full, no, I'm not kidding you. It's fully supported by the government, and there's no need to raise any money outside, unlike the American system. So it was purely an accident, or maybe it was partly by design, that there was a faculty member, I think his name was Morgan, a development biologist, who basically believed that the best way to further science, the best way to create new knowledge, was to have a very egalitarian approach in his laboratory, to have the graduate students call him by first name, literally, and to have everybody talk to each other, to have merit dominate seniority, to have no hierarchy. And when that, and during that approach, over the course of, I think about a decade or so, it turned out that he produced some really superstar students. So he himself was a Nobel laureate at some point, and he had then a series of students later on in life who were Nobel laureates. And that was a turning point which led to the system we are in right now. So what happens is, so instead of being a purely purely top-down system like the German model and the English system, which was very elitist, the American Research University turns out to be a system which is egalitarian, where there was supposed to be education for anybody and everybody who was qualified, and everybody was equal, and good ideas dominated rather than your position, your age, or your seniority. And if you look back, that is what is great about this country. That's what's great about the American education system out here right now. And that is what has differentiated us and allowed us to dominate the world in many, many ways. And I'll tell you a little bit about how that works. So we talked about the evolving mission, so we're not going to focus on that. Now, it turns out that while all of this is going on, the Industrial Revolution is going on, and the Civil War is going on. Right? And sometime during the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln signs this Morrill Act, which is all about creating land-grant universities. So this was the first major piece of public legislation, public policy legislation, which really transformed the landscape in this country, where the education system, instead of catering to a few or several, was now catering to just about anybody and everybody who was qualified. And this was a significant piece of legislation passed during the Civil War. Now you should wonder, like nowadays when there's no war going on, we can hardly pass any legislation. And here, in the middle of the worst war this country ever faced, right on its own land, they were passing legislation that was historic in nature, that has made a very big impact. And so all the state universities that you think about, most of the state universities that you think about, are land-grant universities. So this happened. So when this happened, there was something very interesting. When this legislation was passed, it was passed only for the northern states, because the Civil War was going on, and part of this legislation was, if you're part of the Confederate States, this does not apply to you. So only the northern part of America developed the land-grant system. In 1890, long after the Civil War was over, they passed one more version of the same act, where they allowed the southern states to now create land-grant universities, but only if race was not a criteria in the admission. So this was the opposite, right? What they wanted was these universities to not stop people from coming to a university based on their race. So they wanted the university to be open to everybody. And this has been, so this was the very genesis of HBCUs. So if there were universities that did not allow you to enter the university because of your race, then that state had to create a separate university for people of color. And that was the genesis of historically black colleges and universities. Now, this is actually a very interesting history, because these HBCUs have also had a very big impact on the history of this country. So we won't talk about the Hatch Act. It was just one more. So here's a period of flux now. So now fast forward, and we are between 1876 and 1945. And this is, I think, in many, many ways, really the period when this country is being transformed. This country is being transformed because the Civil War, which was between 61 and 65, I think, and now you're rebuilding the country. There's an industrial society that's being built because of Industrial Revolution. And suddenly around this time, which I did not quite, oh, there it is, mention before, is a lot of wealth has been created. Andrew Carnegie was around this time. Rockefeller was around this time. Johns Hopkins was around this time. And these people, with the wealth that they have created, they start investing, they start believing in science. Up to this time, education is not about science. Education is about theology, medicine, and law. Now they start believing in science. Darwin has published his famous book, and Andrew Carnegie at one point said, that he actually thought that businesses should be run like Darwin's theory, where the survival of the fittest would be the mode of operation. Rockefeller was a believer in that. Johns Hopkins was a believer. Now people don't believe in it today, but those days. So when they created all this wealth, you suddenly saw a resurgence in terms of building these private universities based on philanthropy, and this was the beginning. Okay, and then during this time also was World War I and just about the end of World War II. So I want to take you to the end of World War II. I think this is where, in my mind, the real revolution happened in this country. If you look at the period between 1945 and, let's say, 2000-something, there is no society in the history of Earth that has created as much wealth as this country did between that period. If you look at just the quality of our life and how the quality of our life has changed, every generation had a much better quality of life compared to the previous generation. And that was because of the wealth that was created, mainly because of investments in World War II. Now, that's a bad way to kind of put it, but to win the war, we invested a lot in science and technology. So the machine tools were created during World War II. Radar was created to fight World War II. In the creation of the atomic bomb, the Manhattan Project, a lot of technologies were created that then became industrial technologies that led to a lot of productivity in our society. So that is an important period. And this whole thing, so right when World War II ended, there was at least I think, and actually not I, just about everybody thinks, a very visionary science advisor called Vannevar Bush, who was a professor at MIT. So when the war ends, Roosevelt asked him, like, what do we do now, like with all the infrastructure that we have? And his view was that we should now take this infrastructure that was created to win the war and put it in the service of mankind. And we need to improve the quality of life for all human beings. And that was the creation of the modern American Research University, because until 1945, a lot of the work that was being done by university professors, either at universities or at DOE laboratories that were being built, for example, like Sandia, Los Alamos, and others. Now, when the war ends, all of these people are back at the university, and there's a lot of investment that has been made in infrastructure, in training people, and the universities now suddenly have a very large population of very highly qualified people, partly people who got their PhDs in this country during while working for the war, and many, many immigrants that immigrated from Germany and other countries in 1945. So that was a big turning point. And that is the beginning of, I think, wealth generation. So during that point, not only did we generate wealth, but the Marshall Plan that we put in place helped Japan and Germany recover. And if you look then at a period of 20, 30, 40 years after that, these were the three dominant economies besides England, right? If you look at the period of 2000, just to tell you how the American education system early 20th century, like between 1900 and 1930, the American education system until then was not that strong, because if you look at 1900 to 1930, most of the Nobel Prizes were won by Germans and French, German and French scientists. The U.S. was nowhere to be seen. It's only after that that the U.S. becomes dominant, when all of these investments have happened, right? So what did we want to use science for? Number one was to advance science so we can ensure our health, prosperity, and security. Number two, that the government should invest in universities to meet the demands of industry and government. And the third goal was that they should provide scholarships and fellowships to develop scientific talent. Now, so these were the three goals that were put forward by Vannevar Bush. And these goals were really supported by the government in a very strong way. And you have to contrast this with today, because these are exactly the goals that are not being supported. If you look at sequester over the last couple of years, it has hurt American science and American academia in a very significant way. So you can now say, yeah, you're a chancellor, you guys are used to living on government money, so it's no surprise that you're kind of making that case. But the case I'm making is that the university system in this country, because of investments in research, has really transformed the landscape of this country. The investments in research, so for example, the Morrill Act, which also allowed for the creation of agricultural universities. I'm trying to remember, what year was it? I think in 1870, if I'm not mistaken. Let's see, I have some notes out here. In 1870, half the population in this country was working in farming, was a farmer. By 1920, that number was half of what it was. So much of agriculture productivity gains, much of understanding of how to have higher yields in crops was because of research in agriculture. And I can go down the list of various technologies and advances that were made at universities that really allowed us to improve our standard of living, where the fewer people worked in agriculture, more went into the cities, more worked in industries, more wealth was created, and everybody had a better standard of life, improved standard of life. Okay, so come 1945, what happens is now we have about 16 million coming back, people who have played a role in the war. And these people are supposed to do things, and the government passes one more major piece of legislation which actually creates this egalitarian system of education, which is called the GI Bill, where everybody who came back, who fought for this country, had the opportunity to go to school. And this had a very big impact. In a period of like 5 or 7 or 10 years, 8 million people were educated in this country, and they actually formed the workforce that built the industry in this country, that built the scientific basis. And this was also the time when the middle class was being built. This was also the time where the middle class just expanded totally, where instead of the people being either rich or poor and the divide being very large, everybody could afford just about everything. The rich would pay more for the same things that the middle class would, but everybody could afford everything. Everybody could afford a car, everybody could afford a refrigerator, and so on and so forth, right? And we as a country have sustained this for a very long time. So if you look at this graph, what it shows you is between 1953 to just about 2013, we've invested a lot of money. So this is all in constant dollars. So this is in constant 2012 dollars. So today, we invest close to $140 billion in research in this country. And we invest that money partly for defense and partly for non-defense. But even the defense investments have a very big impact on our industrial complex. So there is a lot of conversation, there's a lot of controversy, not a lot, there's some amount of controversy where is the defense spending worth it or is it not worth it? And it turns out a lot of defense spending basically leads into our industrial sector. And if we did not have that, if we did not have the amount of defense spending we do, it's not clear to me that we would have had the dominant position or the leadership position in the world economy. So the modern research university, I think the UC system is a great example of it. And within the UC system, I think UC San Diego is a great example of it. And I'll tell you why. So if you look at UC San Diego, we were created based on the notion of merit-based. We only picked the best of the best. The faculty members, the first few faculty members who came here as founding faculty were basically either Nobel laureates or about to get a Nobel laureate in the next 3 to 5 years, or members of the National Academy of Science or National Academy of Engineering. They were really the best of the best in their field. And what they did was they created UC San Diego. It was a microcosm of the American higher education system. And in 50 years, we achieved at UC San Diego what the American higher education system or places like Johns Hopkins took like 100+ years to achieve, or 150 years to achieve. So, and within that, the UC, sorry, not within that, and this was all within the UC system. So here's a small story. So when the UC system was created, I think one of the first, I'm trying to remember, was it the first president or the second or third, was this man called Gilman. And Gilman and the legislature could not see eye to eye. So in about 1872, he left UC. And guess who was the first president of Johns Hopkins? It was Daniel Gilman. And he created Johns Hopkins in the vision he had for the UC system, but he and the legislature could not see eye to eye. So after about, I think, 5 years or so, he left. Anyway, so Clark Kerr, who I think was one of the leading figures in American higher education, basically focused on access and excellence, and this is the fundamental basis of the American higher education system, focused on free exploration of ideas, and focused on humanist and scientist interest, and that is the basis of broad-based education that we think about today. That's the basis of what in our strategic plan we are trying to do, which is trying to create a student or educate a student who's trained in both using both the left brain and the right brain. So that's the strategic plan, Steve. So in case you were wondering what is it that I'm doing, that's your simple answer. So the modern research university, I think, has played an extremely important role for this country and has played an important role in our society as a driver of economic development. So if you think about it, when I say Google, what do you think of? How many of you think of a search engine? No. When I say Google, you should not think of a search engine. You should think about the following. You should think about 2 PhD students funded fully by the American government to do a PhD project which nobody knew what the use might be. They finished their PhD and they realized that this could have some potential. They walked down the street to Sand Hill Road and raise some money from these venture capitalists who take an equity position, and they create Google. And 10 years later, it's a $250, $300 billion company with thousands and thousands of jobs. And that's just one of many, many examples that we have done. Then the second thing you should think about is, tell me one country that has Google. Not one. There is no country in the world that I can think of where there exists a Google. There exist search companies, don't get me wrong, but there is no country which does what we do. And that is what has allowed us to create this wealth. And that wealth was generated. Now, this is an exaggeration on my part by the U.S., by the higher education system, but not quite always, right? The American industry invests a lot of money in research too. But I think the higher education system plays a very significant role in improving our quality of life. So between 1945 and about 1980, while we were creating a lot of technology, there was a little bit of, so there was no real methodical way of letting this technology out. So Senators Bayh and Dole, so this was another major piece of legislation called the Bayh-Dole Act, which basically allowed the universities to own their intellectual property. And this was, and this is what, this is how Stanford basically made a lot of money, so through Google. But before that, when HP was created, there was no notion of owning intellectual property. So the dean at that time, the provost at that time, Terman, basically told both Hewlett and Packard, hey, take this technology, go to a garage, do whatever, and just send us some money. So now both of these models have worked well for the U.S. higher education system, where the model of educating and training faculty and students out here and letting them go out with technology and build their companies, which would be the HP model, has worked well because HP gave back more than $500 million to Stanford during the time between the time they were started and now. And the Google model has worked well, where Stanford basically took some sort of an equity position when the technology was spun out. So as chancellor, when I sit back and think about what is it that we should be doing at UC San Diego, I'm tempted more to follow the Google model, the HP model in just about everything, except for a few areas in medicine where the research is really expensive. and where the timelines for transferring this technology are really long. But in information technology and communications technology, I think we need to follow the HP model, where we need to empower people and let them empower our students, empower our faculty, and let them go out and start companies and give back to us, and not always hold on and try to monetize our technology. Because I think, I believe, and I know that most of our research funding comes from public sources, either the state or the federal government. And I think we need to deploy our findings for the sake and benefit of mankind as soon as possible, and not just be sitting on it and trying to monetize every little bit. So that's just me, the socialist, talking right now, but I could be a capitalist too, so at some point. So let me just skip this. So let's just talk about UC San Diego. I think UC San Diego is a perfect example of a modern research university where we made, so what the higher academic system, the higher education system has done for the country, we at UC San Diego have done for San Diego. I cannot imagine San Diego today without UC San Diego. There would be hardly any biotech if there was no UC San Diego. Irwin Jacobs would not be here if there was no UC San Diego. So I can just go down the list. So I think we are doing for San Diego what the higher education system has done for the country. And we are doing it in a more concentrated and a bigger and a better way. We are creating the right quality of students. We are creating the right type of students and putting them out to work. So about a third of our alumni population lives in San Diego or lives in this area. And about 70% lives in California, including Northern California. So we are also a think tank for the country. A lot of our faculty are involved in very high-level committees advising the government. We are ranked number 5 in the country, and this is not quite easy to believe for federal research. Our research portfolio of $1 billion puts us in number 5 in the country. If you look at our faculty, the number of people in National Academy of Engineering, Sciences, Medicine, we are number 6 in the country at about 120 faculty. So we have amazing people, and we are just a microcosm of the best that is the higher education system in this country. Now, how does one preserve this path to a good life? What has happened over the last decade or so, mainly after the dot-com bust, which was about 2000, 2001, there has been a systemic disinvestment or divestment of resources from higher education. So the government has basically dialed back. And the dialing back has taken, there have been many reasons that have been used. Reasons starting from, oh, these professors teach only 3 hours a week or 4 hours a week, so they're wasting their time, they're spending too much money. Why do we need research? There's no need for research, because all the research that we do is supposedly, in people's minds, benefiting the rest of the world, which is not quite true. It's kind of true, but it's not totally true. So there has been a significant divestment from higher education. And we, on our side, have not been as responsible as we should have been, could have been, and should be. There are 2 sectors in this economy that are growing at inflation plus 3%. Does anybody want to tell me what are those 2 sectors? Healthcare and education. And anybody knows, everybody knows, growing at inflation plus 3% is an unsustainable growth model, because very soon half the economy is going to be healthcare and education, and that cannot be a balanced economy. That cannot be a good economy. So clearly, we could have been more careful, we could have been more responsible, but for whatever reason, this is what happened. And those, in my mind, are the 2 big reasons why there has been a sort of an anti-higher education wave. But this is what's been happening. So in this case, what you see out here is the funds. In this case, I'm talking about the UC system now. The blue line that's going down is the investment in the UC system, and the black line that's going up is the investment in the corrections system in this state. It's actually true. This is true. You can see that they crossed like 10 years ago. and they're still diverging, right? And that has to stop. And I was in Sacramento yesterday, and one of the conversations was, how does one use the higher education system and the research we do to better predict the behavior? If somebody's let out of a jail, how would you better be able to predict that the probability of this person coming back is going to be very low, and you feel comfortable releasing the person, right? So I don't know the answer to that, but I'm sure somebody at UC San Diego does. Here's where we are at UC, in the UC system, where if you see the dark blue, which is the student tuition and fees, and the yellow are the UC general funds, and then the dark blue is the state general funds. And you can see the state general funds are going down steadily, which are being compensated by what we think of as student tuition and fees. And when you do that, what happens is the burden now, instead of being shared by society totally, is moving to the families of the student. Now, you might say there's nothing wrong with this, except for the fact that the median income in this country for a family of 4 is $53,000. Half the people in the country make less than $53,000, right? And the cost of going to UC, which is one of the more inexpensive universities in the country, is about $30,000. So a family that's making and I'm telling you, half the people in this state make less than $53,000, because what we are seeing on the coast is not what this state looks like. The state looks like inside of 10 miles from the coast. That's what most of the state is, an agricultural state. So there is clearly a problem here. And this problem is actually getting worse because there's a transfer of wealth from the government, from the taxpayer to the government, through loans to the student. So the student at the end of the day is holding the bag on many of these loans, right? So this blue part, the light blue part that you see, typically shows up as a loan. So this was part of my motivation. So when I was thinking about what is it that we should be doing, okay, before I tell you that, so let me talk a little bit about the widening income gap in this country. So the dark blue line is from 1947 to 1973. And then you can see that regardless of the quintile you were in, the left side is the lowest fifth, and the right side is the top fifth, and the rightmost is the top 5%. Everybody's income increased by nearly the same amount, between 2.5% to 3%, regardless of what income band you were in. Now you fast forward to 1973 to 2005, what you see is if you were rich, your income grew faster than if you were poor. So the rich got richer and the poor got poorer, right? And this is why there is such a wide disparity now between, that's why the median income right now is not close to the average income in this country. So, and this is an important thing to remember. Because of this widening income gap, we are at a point right now where we could go back to when the first university was created, where only the rich got educated and the poor were left behind, where if you came from the right pedigree, you had the right opportunity, and everybody else was left behind. That was how we started the university system. But what made this country great was that anybody and everybody, people like me who came from a third world country, came for a good life, had the same opportunity as somebody who was born in this country to a rich family. And I think we need to ask ourselves, is that the life we want? Is that the society we want? Or we want to go back to the mid-1600s and the early 1700s? And I think in my mind the answer is obvious. The good life was created by this being a merit-based, merit-driven society where your hard work paid off and your opportunity was given to everybody in a nearly an equal manner. And right now we are not there. So right now, if we did not have the Chancellor's Associates supporting us, if we did not expand that, if we did not have the scholarship program supporting our students, we would be basically reinforcing the notion of the rich people being able to send their kids to college and the poor people being not able to send their kids to college. In fact, the people who are squeezed the most are the middle class people. Because the poor people, if you're in the lower quintile, you still have Pell Grants. If you make like 100, 120, 130,000 a year, which I'm sure to most people in this room is not a lot of money, that's when the difficulty starts. If you have 1 or 2 kids, spending $30,000 after-tax dollars to send somebody to school is not that easy. And at that level of income, $120,000, the financial aid is basically close to zero, from what I can tell. So in my mind, education is something we should be investing in. It's a responsibility. It's my responsibility to make sure that the costs don't go out of control like they have in the past. It is the citizens' responsibility to make sure that there's investment in higher education. It's the government responsibility. And I think at the end, we will all benefit from this. So let me show you some graphs that are interesting. So this tells you that if you have some sort of a degree, right, even an associate's degree, the return on investment is much higher than if you invested in stocks or gold or 10-year treasury. Actually, don't invest in treasury. Right now it's 0%, right? So, and this is actually interesting, and this dynamic is changing also. This is when everybody who came out of college was able to find a good job. In the last 5 years, I can tell you that is not the case. The highest level of unemployment is amongst fresh graduates. And so there's a disconnect out here, and we have to fix our economy so that the educated people, the students coming out of colleges, fresh graduates, are able to find a job and are not out there unemployed. And here's another interesting one. So this is return on investment for an individual. So everybody was born in the bottom quintile, and what this tells you is that if you had no degree, then half the people born in the bottom 20% stayed in the bottom 20%. On the other hand, if you had a degree, the probability you would go to the next 20% is 37% of the people would go there. 26% would go to the third 20%. So you had a good chance of moving higher up in the socioeconomic status, right? So again, reinforcing the power of education. But this was all the power of education in an economy that was growing, in an economy where not only the stock market was going up, where the job market was also growing. And we got to find a way, and right now we are not quite there. The stock market is totally out of sync with the job market. But that's what I'm told the president is working on, so I'm not going to worry about it. So now we come to some other numbers out here. So for every $1 California spends in higher education, one can show that the return is about $4.50. And this is by growing industries, increasing through increased taxes, and so on and so forth. And for every $1 that is reduced, you lose about $2.10. And this should be obvious from the following. So if you look at UC San Diego, our state budget is about, round numbers, let's say $250 million. Our total budget is about $3 billion. Our payroll is about $2 billion in that $3.5 billion budget. On the $2 billion payroll, 7% state tax average is $140 million. So the state gives me $250. I send back $140 because I multiplied that $250 to $3.5 billion coming from everywhere else, and send back in taxes $140. So the net cost of running UC San Diego to the taxpayer is about $110 million, for which you educate 30,000 students every year. So if you think about it that way, it is actually a pretty efficient system. But that works only at a place like UC San Diego, which has got a very humongous research base. Not every university is like UC San Diego. And for this country to function well, for the system to function well, we need UC San Diego's, we need community colleges, we need San Diego States, and we need small private four-year colleges that educate only about 400 or 500 students a year. So we need every one of them. What I want to close with is, I think I've had a good life. It may not be exciting, but it has been a good life. And it has been mainly because of the opportunity offered by this country through the education system. And I am convinced, and I say this not because I'm Chancellor, I am convinced that this education system has to be maintained. It can be made more efficient. It can be trimmed. It can be trimmed on the edges. but fundamentally it's a very strong education system. And I think if we, a country of 300 million people or 320 million people, have to lead the world of 7 billion people, we have to make sure that every one of our citizens is very well educated and contributing to the maximum that one can, because without that we won't be able to lead the world in ways that we have, at least in economically, we won't be able to lead the world. So with that said, let me just say thank you. And this is me at age 28. This is me with the American dream, which is hanging out with the president. And this is me with the real dream, which is being the Chancellor of UC San Diego. So thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Is education an individual good or a public good? And depending on how you answer that will decide who should pay for it. So let's just look at K through 12 education, right? K through 12 education in this country is predominantly public, predominantly public. That was not the case. So if I had given a similar talk on the history of K through 12 education, you would have seen parochial schools dominate, and then the public schools become important only when, I think it was a Michigan Supreme Court, if I'm not, it's called a Kalamazoo verdict, where they decided, or they said, that it's okay to tax people to pay for public education, and that would still be a separation of church and state, because remember, the schools were more parochial than they are right now. So, and we live with that today, right? We pay taxes that go to fund our local school, even though you may have no children at all. But why is it that we don't support that when it comes to 12 through 16, as in college education? Because in this economy, we need more college-educated students, young men and women, than we need just high school graduates. So my view is education in general is more of a public good than of a private individual good. I think if you were to ask me, undergraduate education, BS, is more of a public good than of an individual good. Master's and PhD is more of an, master's for sure is an individual good, where I am now trying to improve my skills or acquire skills that'll get me more money with less experience, and for that I should be able, capable, and willing to pay out of pocket, either by taking a loan or whatever, right? And then PhD, the work I do is a public good. That's why the country, the feds or the state, has to invest in that, because that is going to impact everybody. So a different way to think about that is insurance. If we did not have life insurance, we would be very insecure people. No, seriously. And life insurance basically is spreading the risk, where we all get together, we all know bad things are going to happen to one of us or many of us between now and 30 years from now, and we spread the risk over time and over people. And I think public good is basically very similar. It is taking responsibility over time and over people. And over people in this case is mandatory. It's defined by the country, as the whole country. So I don't know if I answered your question or not, but that's how I think. So the question is that UCSD has been seen as a science and engineering university, and arts is a very minor part of that. So what do I see as a role of arts and humanities in UCSD? So first of all, let me start by saying, I think in this day and age, you need educated people who can think both with their left brain and their right brain, right? And the only way to do that is to have a campus where the arts and humanities have an equal standing vis-a-vis science and engineering. And equal standing does not mean they have to be equal in numbers. It does not mean they have to occupy the same equal space. It does not mean they have to have equal number of faculty. It just means that we have to respect and accept each one of them equally. So that's my view. Secondly, even though UCSD is known as science and engineering, and I know you think that, I know most of you think that, it really irritates me when you think that, because our department of music is better than some of our science departments. Our department of theater and dance is better than some of engineering departments. So I So I go out of my way to make sure people understand that we have departments in arts and humanities that are top 5. If you look at social sciences, cognitive psychology, we define that whole area for the country. So we are really at the top of the field. Our mistake probably is we have not talked about it that much. Maybe our mistake is because our research funding is so high, which mainly comes from medicine, science, and engineering. It looks like we are that. But I can tell you as Chancellor, I'm focused on both of them equally. And like I said, by being focused on both of them equally does not mean they get equal resources, equal space, equal number of buildings. It just means they're equally important to me, and I want to have a balanced campus where I want to see my son or daughter go and not feel bad about it. So thank you very much.